So I took PL for its MOT a couple of weeks ago, and I started it up and immediately noticed a problem with it. It has played around before, but it's always resolved itself after running for a few minutes. So the battery and everything was fine. I laid it up for the winter. I disconnected the battery. I've done the tyres, fuel, etc. But our charging light is not going out when I start it. So I don't actually need a multimeter on here because I've got a voltmeter on the dashboard, and as you can see it's just sitting in the red zone there, so that's probably indicating around about 11.5 to 12 volts, so it's not charging. The fact that the charging light is on is good because that generally means the IND circuit, or the exciter wire for the alternator, is working. So basically the exciter wire works by having a live that goes through the bulb. So you have a live that goes through the bulb, and then it's a series circuit, then the output of that bulb goes to the connector on the alternator, which when it's not running or not charging, that is earthed. So it lights up the bulb, but when you start the engine, the alternator should then kick in and start charging, and obviously then that circuit becomes a positive going through the bulb to a positive on the alternator, so there's no potential difference, there's no voltage difference, so the charging light goes out. It also supplies a small amount of voltage to the exciter windings in the alternator to basically, it's like an electromagnet to magnetize it to start the charging of the alternator. So as we can see, the IND circuit is fine because the bulb's lit up. But obviously the alternator is not charging. Now the checks I've done, very straightforward. Grab myself a torch. The first thing I done was just to check between the alternator body and the cylinder head, just to make sure that the alternator was earthed okay, which no reason it shouldn't be, to be honest. I also, just for belts and braces really, check between the alternator and the body, just in case like the earth strap is broken, but I wouldn't think it would start if the earth strap was broken, because it would affect that as well. Next thing to check is we're getting battery voltage at the B+ terminal here, and then we have the exciter wire terminal here, which when disconnected, that should show voltage there, and it might be on some vehicles it might be 5 volts from memory, but on this, on an MPI Mini, with that disconnected, it should have 12 volts positive there. And like I say, when you connect it up, when it's not charging, this terminal is negative, and then when it starts charging, it will receive voltage through that terminal, which will excite the alternator, and then that should then become battery voltage, and then that extinguishes the battery warning light. So I actually took the back off of this alternator. I took it all apart. I thought it might be the brushes for the slip rings, because they can stick. So I took it out. It comes as part of a voltage regulator pack with the brushes in. The brushes were fine, they weren't sticking, but I think it's the actual voltage regulator in the alternator itself, which unfortunately you cannot get separately, or I couldn't find separately. So I've had to order a new alternator, which is frustrating because if you look at this alternator, it doesn't look very old at all. But I ordered a brand new one online off eBay. It looks exactly the same as the alternator that's on the car. It's not branded. It's not Lucas or anything like that. I think it would have originally been a Lucas alternator. Might be wrong actually, might have been Magneti Morelli or something like that. But that's the brand new alternator. The regulator pack is in the back here when you take this plastic cover off. But like I say, you can't get that separately because I think on my car, the actual alternator itself, the rotating electrics inside are absolutely fine. So £89 that was. I would just give a word of warning because when I searched for it on eBay, it actually listed a few. So this is a 65 amp alternator. It was £89, or a seller was advertising a 95 amp alternator, selling it as an upgrade. And I was half sort of tempted because whenever you see anything like that, you know, nice upgrade, I've got a 65 amp alternator on there. Let me stick a 95 amp alternator on there because obviously bigger is better. But I don't think necessarily the case, because that 95 amps, if that alternator's capable of outputting 95 amps, if the battery will accept it, that is what the alternator charge rate will be. If the battery's flat and it will take that amount of charge, you'll get 95 amps flowing through all the wiring, which was designed to take 65. So unless you're upgrading all the wiring, I would think that is a bit iffy. This wiring on here, the actual alternator wiring itself, the main, which takes a main current, is not mega thick like it is on some cars. And I would expect there to be an engineering tolerance in there. You know, if they have made the alternator so it will accept or the cabling so it would accept sort of 65 amps of current, you would have expected them to maybe rate the cables 20% over, so an extra, well, let's say for instance an extra sort of 15 amps, which takes it to 80 amps. But 95 amps going through cables which were designed to take 65, I think it's a bit iffy. But yeah, up to you. Some people might have done that. They might have a 95 amp alternator on their MPI Mini and not have a problem with it. But again, I've mentioned this in other videos, I don't see the point. There is not much point in me having a 95 amp alternator on there. If I had loads of extra additional electrical equipment, big stereo system, that sort of thing, I might want to upgrade it, but it's not, it's a standard car. So let me whip this alternator off. Let's get the new one on. Fingers crossed it'll fix the fault. There we go, relatively pain-free. Now all I need to do is bolt the new one on, make sure it works. There's always a little like split collar on alternators here that gives some adjustment in the spacing on usually one of the sort of mounting brackets. When I put it on here, there's probably a good sort of 3 or 4 mil side to side movement, which means that like split collar there needs to move this way a little bit. Now, there's a lot of people, and I've got away with it lots of times in the past, where you just bolt it up. So you bolt this side, you bolt that side, and it will pull the collar through. But I have made the mistake of doing that, and this was really tight, and it actually snapped the bracket on the alternator many years ago. So now I usually just tap them through till they're approximately in the right place. As you can see, that now has protruded through that side a bit more. A little bit too much, so we'll just knock it back a little bit again. I'm sure there's many people that just do it the way I've done it in the past, but as I say, it's just a word of caution, because I have broken an alternator before by doing it like that. And it may just be that the collar was seized, which is just bad luck, but I'll just be I'm always mindful of it now. Now obviously this is a pretty straightforward job. It's made even easier because this alternator's been off before, and I've copper slipped all the bolts, nothing's seized up. And I think I might have mentioned it in previous videos, sometimes it seems a bit overkill to be cleaning up the threads of all the bolts and stuff like that, but you will thank yourself when you need to take it apart again. Probably the trickiest bit is adjusting the tensioner for the belt, because that's just down the bottom there, the thread gets corroded, and it can make it a difficult job if the thread's corroded. Luckily on mine, like I say, I've cleaned it up in the past. Right, there we go. Let's get the battery back on. I've tensioned the belt up. Fingers crossed. Oh, don't forget the ignition lead. Right then, that job probably took me 20 minutes. Might have even been less, but as I say, made a lot easier by the fact that none of the bolts are seized or anything like that. Let's just get inside. We've disconnected the battery, so I'm sure you probably know this, but you have to resynchronize the key fob. So you usually just need to press lock and unlock 5 times You'll hear it click. Sometimes they don't resynchronize. If they don't, then take the fob apart, take the battery out. I think it's a CR2032. Press and hold the buttons for like 10 seconds. Put the battery back in, then do lock 5 times, unlock 5 times, and then you should hear it click. So, immobiliser lights out, ignition on, our battery warning light is on, which means the IND circuit should be powered up. And brilliant, so the battery light's gone out. No need for a voltmeter because we've got a gauge inside the car. It's well, that's reading just under 13 volts. At least it's a positive charge. Now what we do want to do is just load it up. So stick some lights on, stick the heated rear window on. That takes a lot of current. And we can stick the fog lights on as well. So that's quite a lot of drain on that alternator now. It's probably pulling, I guess, probably about 30 amps. So and you can actually hear the alternator whirring a little bit where it's working. So that is good, and you see the voltage come up as we turn to the loads off now, and as that battery's recovering a bit, we're above 13 volts now. It's ideal. We're probably around about sort of 13.8 volts, and you'll see the top end of the voltmeter, it goes right up to 17. So once we start going above sort of 14 and a half, 15, that might mean it's overcharging, which is not good. Right, so like I said, the body of this alternator is good, and I'm sure the rotating electrical parts inside, rotating electrics, are absolutely fine. From my sort of diagnosis, I could tell I had battery voltage at the B plus cable into the alternator. I had an exciter wire, or the IND wire, the battery warning light, whatever you want to call it. I do see people sometimes, and it gets mentioned every now and again, about people replacing their battery warning lights when they replace all the warning lights in the dash with LEDs. The problem with LEDs is they only flow current one way. They're a light emitting diode, so they'll only allow current to flow one way. So they don't actually work in an IND exciter circuit. You can get some LEDs which have inbuilt resistors in them, and they will work, but I'd just be careful. If you're replacing your dash lights with LED bulbs, it can cause a problem. And likewise, you can also fit the wrong wattage bulb in there, and the wrong wattage bulb, which I fitted, I've done this before, I've done it on Sprout, I fitted the wrong wattage bulb, and that basically backfeeds the whole ignition system, so you couldn't turn the car off. You'd switch the ignition off and it would backfeed the whole ignition system. So it's quite important to make sure you get the right bulb in your charging light. So like I said, good body on this, good rotating electrics. My alternator on Sprout, the body is cracked on it. It works fine, but I think what I'm going to do, I've just taken a few bolts here. You can take the back cover off. This is the bit that is faulty. So this is, again, there's a couple of screws to come out here, but this is the brush plaque for the slip ring. So initially I thought these were sticking, because that can happen. You'll probably see here, I've also tried cleaning up the contacts there to make sure it was getting a good contact, but it just wasn't outputting anything on the voltage regulator and controlling the field winding. So this just works like an electromagnet to regulate the charge. The more charge you want, the stronger the electromagnetic field, and this voltage regulator regulates that magnetic field to regulate the voltage, and that will then limit the current into the charging system. So I think hopefully what I'll do on the alternator that's on Sprout, it's got a good regulator on. Hopefully I can swap the regulators over with my own good one. put this all back together, and then that gives me alternator to go on sprout, which isn't cracked. This one, the worrying bit is this alternator is not very old, so and it's the same non-branded type as that, so you think, is that one going to fail prematurely? The only sort of finishing touch here is I think you can get the original sort of part number stickers to go on there, so I'll probably do that. But I think that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. Like, subscribe, share, do all of that great stuff, and I'll catch you again soon.